driven by what you are given. So what I mean by this is I can talk about solutions to procrastination all day long, obviously, and it really is just up to you. So it's all about what you're driven by, and then what you're given is your opportunity, so what you think of. So your opportunity here is to graduate from Virginia Tech. That's your long-term opportunity. So what you're given, I want you to be driven by what you're given. So you're given the opportunity to, most of you wouldn't think of the opportunity to take a chemistry class, obviously. It's not something you'd think about, that opportunity, but it is an opportunity for you. So just be driven by those opportunities that you're given. All right, so that's what I mean by that statement. So when we're talking about procrastination today, the first thing I'm going to talk about is really the understanding of procrastination in our minds, what that actually means. Then we're going to go into what it means in your life, and then we're just going to talk about solutions that you could use. All right, because obviously there really is no real solution to procrastination. If there was, I would just tell it to you, and then you could leave and go do it for an hour, and you wouldn't have to procrastinate anymore the rest of your life. Obviously, if there was that solution, then we would all just do that. All right, so there really is no solution, but I'm going to just try to help you out with it. So first of all, we're going to start with our mind. So I'm just going to draw the brain. All right, that's a really good brain, I'm sure. All right, so we're starting with the brain. We're going to start with the frontal lobe. We're just going to call it FL. So inside the frontal lobe is your prefrontal cortex, and you don't need to write this down. Prefrontal cortex. All right, so there's two things going on in your mind when it deals with procrastination. So you have the prefrontal cortex, and I'll get into what this means in a second. And then you have the limbic system. So that's right here. This is the limbic system. So these two things are really actually going at each other when we're talking about procrastination. So the best way for me to set it up, I'm just going to diagram it as, let's say, two football teams going at it. So I'm just going to draw an offensive formation is probably the best way for me to deal with this. Alright, so this right here is going to be our prefrontal cortex. And so what goes on in the prefrontal cortex is where all your behaviors are happening. So any behavior that you have is going on in the prefrontal cortex. And I'll get into a little bit more detail of that in here in a second. And then on defense, we're just going to have, this is going to be our limbic system. All right. So the defense is the limbic system. What is going on in the limbic system is your random thought. So any random thought you have, so if you're sitting at your computer working on a paper and you have the random thought of, I'm hungry, or I'm going to check Facebook, or I want a cookie, or whatever you may think of. I want to tweet somebody or text somebody or whatever happens. That's going on in your limbic system. So we have both of these things facing each other in our minds when it comes to procrastination. All right, so that's where we're starting out with in our mind. Does everyone understand that? Any questions about that yet? All right, so I'll come back to the mind here in a second because we're going to add something to that. All right, so the first line that you need to write down, and I'll say this very slowly, it's a quote from ASAP Science online. So most humans have the tendency, I'm not even going to write it, you can write it. Most humans have the tendency to over or underestimate the value. So value, I want you to capitalize and underline it. Most humans have the tendency to over or underestimate the value of reward. You can capitalize that as well. Value of reward based on, we're still going, based on temporal proximity. And I'm going to explain what all of this means, this entire sentence. So based on temporal proximity. All right, so I'm going to start with what temporal proximity is. It's also used as temporal discounting. It's the same thing. So temporal discounting, what that means. Temporal discounting means, I'll just put TD here. Temporal discounting means if I say I offer Austin $100, he can take it right now today. All right, so that's today, $100 today. Or I offer him $110 1 month from now. Most people, 1 month. Most people are going to take the $100 today. All right, so then the difference with this is if I were to offer any of you all $100 1 year from today, or $110 1 year and 1 month from today. These are the exact same time and the exact same values, but most people would take the $110 because they've already waited an entire year. All right, so it's the exact same time, exact same value, but then you would take different situation. You would take the different situation. All right, does that make sense? So that's exactly what we're talking about when we talk about temporal discounting or temporal proximity. So the further away the reward is, the lower the value of it will be to you. All right. To compare that to you, if you have, you're taking a test and they say it's in a month, all right, so your reward is going to be whatever grade you get on that test. You don't value it so much now, but you're going to value it a lot 6 weeks from now, or So if it's a test in 6 weeks, you're not going to value it now. You're going to value it more in 6 weeks. Does that make sense? All right. Any questions about that at all? We all get that. All right. So you understand where we're coming from when this relates to procrastination, though. So our value versus reward. All right. So now we're going to throw something else back in there. I'm going to go back to the brain. So what we're going to throw in is these two things are playing against each other, and then we're going to throw in dopamine. I'm just going to make dopamine the football. All right. So dopamine is something that you enjoy. Whatever you enjoy is your dopamine. So these two things are battling against each other, and then we throw in dopamine, and it makes that a lot harder. So something that you all might enjoy, if you leave this class and you go back to your dorm, you may get on Facebook right then, because it's a reward right then that you value right then at that moment, and you've enjoyed it in the past. So in dopamine, we don't just play with one football, we could play with multiple ones. So all these footballs, obviously the more we have, the more we would enjoy this game, all right? Obviously in our heads. So the more times that you've gotten on Facebook, you're going to go back to it more often and over and over and over again because you enjoy that, all right? You're giving yourself that reward, all right? Any questions about what dopamine is? This is what will cause us to cram. So like I sort of already said, when your values, say for instance, I give you a paper that's due 3 weeks from now that's only 2 pages long, most of you aren't going to go back and work on it right now because you don't value it. You're only going to value it the night before. All right, so that's the problem that we run into with procrastination, because our reward is the next day, so we're going to do it that day. All right? Shane's shaking his head. No, you would do it right now.
No.
Yeah. All right, so solutions that we're going to work on that I'm going to tell you about that you can possibly use. All right, so I want you to write these down. So the first solution, we're just going to call it the build-up solution. All right, and so what we're talking about when we talk about the build-up solution is really just like anything in life, something that you have to build up to get better at that. All right, so you're trying to reach a goal, you're going to build up to get better at it. An example would be if you weightlift. If you go into a weight room and you want to bench 300 pounds, but really your body can only handle 185 pounds, you're not going to be able to go in and bench 300 pounds at that exact moment. You have to build up to that. All right, so you can't go and study for 4 hours tonight if you've never studied for 4 hours in one night. Your body's not going to be able to handle that, so you're going to get shut down after a while. So if I go into a weight room, bench 185, after week, I'm going to have to build up to 300 pounds. Does that make sense? So it's the same with procrastination. So it's just one of the solutions to use. Another one is going to be the Pomodoro technique. Pomodoro. All right, so this is probably, I would say, the most famous technique that people use. Pomodoro technique is one that you set a timer. It's all timed. So at the end of the time, then you reward yourself with, say, 5 free minutes to do whatever you want. So if you set a timer for 20 minutes, when the 20 minutes is up, then you give yourself a reward. The problem, I would say, with the Pomodoro technique is that a lot of people will not use that time wisely. So if you set 20 minutes for your time to study, you use the first 10 minutes to find the chapter you need to read. You read it for 5, then you review it for another 5. You really only have studied 5 to 7 in the entire 20-minute period that you set out to study. So it is good, and it can definitely work for you. All right, our last one is going to be the tolerable 10. And I would say this one is probably my favorite. So the tolerable 10 is sort of like the Pomodoro, but it's set up where you're not setting a specific reward at the end that you're like, okay, I'm going to do 5 minutes at the end of this. So it's set up, so the tolerable 10 is that, say you've never studied before, you're just going to do 10 minutes first. So I'm going to do 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, I'm not going to stop if I'm rolling. Have you ever gotten to that point where you're writing a paper and you just start rolling? You know, you're in the groove. So the tolerable 10 is pretty much that. You start it. The hard part is obviously the starting. But once you start it, you give yourself for sure 10 minutes. At the end of the 10, if you don't want to keep rolling, you don't have to. But if you do, you keep going. All right? And so if, say, for instance, you keep going to 45 minutes, then obviously the next time that you sit down, you've done 45 before, so then it doesn't sound as good, but you could do a tolerable 45 because you've done that before. You can sit down, do 45 minutes, and if you get to 45, you want to stop, then you can. If you don't want to, then you keep rolling. All right, and it's sort of the build-up, same situation as the build-up. Any solutions that you all have done that have worked for you that is not like this at all when it comes to procrastination? Force yourself. But that's that drive, right? That's what we talked about at the beginning, having that drive. All right? So that's sort of what we're going to end with as well. All right, so if we know what is motivating us, if we know what that drive is, if we know how we want to take advantage of the opportunity, then obviously we're going to be more willing to go at our work or do what we need to do and get it done. Because we know what our value is, we know what our reward's going to be, and we will obviously fulfill it. All right? Does that make sense? So really it all comes back to the very beginning, just knowing our drive, all right? Having the drive inside.